Thanks, Steve, and hi, folks. And this is actually an interesting time to be doing this call because it's a conversation that I feel like we've been preparing to have for as long as I've been with BodyWise. It's been like a 2-decade-long adventure for me. So Oxyg has been a great formula for all of us, and I know there's a lot of you who are going to be sad and you're going to miss it. And so let me just start with this I do think a little history here is important. Back well before I came to BodyWise, in fact, Steve, I don't even know the year that this product was launched, but it was early, right? It was early 90s probably.
Yes, early 90s.
I think back in the early 1990s. So, somewhere in the range of 7 or 8 years before I came to BodyWise was when Oxyg was formulated. And the organic germanium was really a unique and special ingredient in there. Germanium is a mineral. It's not a very common one. It's a trace mineral, and as John Paul sort of alluded to, and I'll come back to that, most of the forms of germanium are not forms that we consider nutritional. Most of the forms are toxic. And we see that with other minerals too, with selenium and chromium, right? All of those minerals that are trace elements all have forms that are nutritional and have forms that are non-nutritional that would be dangerous. There's certainly with chromium, there's forms of chromium you would not want to have in your multivitamin. And there's other forms that are fabulous for helping support healthy blood sugar. So it's just very different forms depending on what they're bound to and how they're structured. So germanium, in this particular form, which is germanium sesquioxide, had some very unique research that had largely come out of Japan. There were some folks here, some scientists here in the US, like Dr. Paris Kidd, who had done research with it here in the US. And we were one of the few companies that actually put this into a nutritional product. We were really one of the few that did it. It was not in any way an inexpensive ingredient. So I think a lot of people were hesitant to adopt it even early on. And it's always caused some degree of confusion with regulators and with manufacturers. And it's because it is probably the only form of germanium that's considered to be nutritional and not toxic. And we have struggled over the years to keep a supply chain for it, to be really honest. In fact, at the time I joined BodyWise, we were sort of facing potentially a crisis around that again. That is something that we've faced numerous times. But to come back to Supercell, a couple of years before I came to BodyWise, Supercell had been launched, and the original entire intent of Supercell was to be the replacement product for Oxyg. That was actually the design and development of that product. It was developed by Dr. Margaret Ames, who was my predecessor at BodyWise. And if those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Ames, those were big shoes to fill when I was a little newbie doctor 20 whatever years ago and came to this company. Dr. Ames was one of probably the most highly regarded PhD researchers in the world of antioxidants. In fact, she's really extraordinarily well known for her research on vitamin E. She left BodyWise and had a whole laboratory named for her at the Linus Pauling Institute in Oregon, which is the Ames lab that has been dedicated to antioxidant research ever since. So she had formulated Supercell as the replacement product for Oxyg under the very clear assumption that they were going to lose germanium. So even when I came in around 2000, and I remember first learning the BodyWise products and actually asking Tom Tierney and saying, explain to me why these two formulas look so similar. And he said, well, that's because this one over here was created as a replacement for this one over here, but then we didn't lose the germanium, so we just had both. We try to be ahead of ourselves in this company. We try to be ahead of the curve as well. And I think in this case, we just ended up being a couple decades ahead of the curve. That said, given that this formula Supercell was created as a replacement for Oxyg, that was done so very thoughtfully. As I said, Dr. Ames was probably, one of the top researchers in antioxidant research and cellular oxygenation. And, she was incredibly thoughtful in putting these ingredients together. I think when you look at the formulas, you should see a lot of similarity between them. If you put them side by side, you'll see that there's actually a good overlap between the ingredients that's in them. And then there's some other novel things that are in Supercell that are not in Oxyg. So the basic premise, right, that I think people relate to with Oxyg is cellular oxygenation, right? That's how people think about the formula. It's kind of the way that we've talked about it a lot. And that's in part because the germanium sesquioxide, those oxides are actually oxygen molecules. And germanium is one of the minerals that can carry oxygen into our cells, okay? The one that most commonly does that in your body, I'm going to pick on you, Steve Hughes. What's the most common mineral that carries oxygen in your cells?
I don't know. Selenium?
No. One more try. You get one more try.
Well, I don't know.
Name a mineral. What's a mineral, you know?
Well, calcium.
Okay, no, not that one either. Iron.
Potassium, iron.
Iron is our mineral that carries oxygen into our cells, right? Iron is in your red blood cells, right? And it's fundamentally part of a molecule called hemoglobin. And what that hemoglobin molecule does is collects oxygen and transports it. It's our oxygen transport molecule into our cells. Okay, and then the oxygen comes off of the hemoglobin and we get something called reduced hemoglobin. And then that transports, goes back to your lungs and it gets more oxygen that gets trapped in it. And then it goes back to your cells, and that's the cycle we have. So, germanium is another mineral that can do that. We have other things that can do that. One of the other things that can do it that you'll see in Supercell is actually the molecule that does that for plants. So the molecule in plants that's analogous to the hemoglobin in our bodies is chlorophyll, right? So we have hemoglobin, plants have chlorophyll, and that is the plant-based oxygen-carrying molecular structure. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that when you look at the Supercell formula, you'll see that there's chlorophyll in there, right? So it's a really nice, natural way to do that. We have other things that feed into that as part of the cycle of what happens with cellular oxygenation. So I don't know enough of the rest of you to pick on you well enough, so I'm just going to keep on picking on Steve because I like
Of course you are.
Steve, why do we even care about oxygenating our cells? And don't say breathing, because we do need respiration. But why do we care about it? Why is it important? Like we talk about Oxygen for things like sports performance. Why do we need oxygen?
Developing ATP, energy.
Right, energy. Okay, stop right there. Energy. That's it. That's the fundamental thing, right? So oxygen is the fire in your cells, right? It's what ignites the fuel, right? I eat food, right? And food just by itself is not going to drive the energy in my body, right? I actually need to burn that fuel. So you can think of, your food as the log that you put on the fire. And if you just put logs in your fireplace, not much happens, right? It's not very exciting. You can get a really nice stack of wood. That's all you're going to have. You add fire and now that burns and you're warm. Okay, that's cool. I got light, I got heat. That's excellent. In your body, the fire is oxygen. Okay. And we burn it. And that's what we do. But we also feed that whole cycle of energy production through other things. So we've talked in this company about things like the Krebs cycle, right? That is part of that energy producing cycle in the body. So one of the things that Supercell has that was not so much present in Oxygen are some of the nutrients that feed that cycle that happens that leads from that reaction between oxygen and food to energy production, right? So that includes feeding things through the Krebs cycle. It includes things that support our mitochondria, right? Which is where all this interaction is happening, is in these little parts of your cells called the mitochondria. So, I think what was done very smartly in the formula of Supercell was asking the bigger question of, okay, cellular oxygenation is a part of that. We need to have the oxygen there, but we also need to have the things that support that, right? So we add some chlorophyll because that helps bring more cellular oxygenation. We add things like ornithine, alpha-ketoglutarate because that's feeding the Krebs cycle. We add some other plant-based sources of trace elements, like some more plant-based sources of iron. So we've got some of these whole food concentrates that are going to help feed that cycle of oxygenation into the cells. And then, probably because it was her specialty, but probably also because she thought about these things, but we have a bunch of antioxidants in there, which is the other side of the cycle, right? So what happens when you burn all this oxygen is you actually create free radicals, right? It's the downfall of creating energy is we create some stuff as side effects of that we don't totally want, right? So I think one of the really cool things about having Supercell, and Dr. Ames knew this, and she was a long time before her time, but she was an antioxidant expert. That's what she did. And she said, well, if we're going to amp up this, cellular oxygen and we're going to amp up energy production, we have to protect ourselves on the other side from what happens with the fallout of that. So we need these cellular antioxidants, we need mitochondrial antioxidants, we need things that kind of complete that cycle and make sure that when we're creating these free radicals as the result of producing extracellular energy, that we protect ourselves from that. So that's really kind of the story of Supercell right there, right? Supercell was going to be, the product that, replaced Oxygen for the last 25 years. You just sort of have that now. So at this point in time, anybody who's, running out of Oxygen, I would certainly say you should feel very comfortable that you've got a product that was already there and designed for this purpose. And the next step that, we're all talking about internally is, what can we do now? I always look at the loss of an ingredient as an opportunity to do something cool. And certainly one of the things that has happened in the last 25 years is we've got new science and we've got new stuff. And we've had a handful of things in review that we've been talking about and looking at, and I think we're getting close to narrowing them down at this point to something that I think, if we all agree on it, could be an exciting opportunity in the future. So we're not 100% there yet, and I'm certainly not prepared to talk about that because I don't have the ability to do that right now. But I think you could potentially see something that would come out in the future that would not in its own way be a replacement for Oxygen, because I'm not big on that. I'm going to be real honest. I don't think we should just be looking at, equaling ourselves. I think our job here at this company is to better ourselves in every possible way at every opportunity that we can. And I think we have a chance right now to ask ourselves, if we've lost this thing that we've loved, what's our opportunity now to do something better than what we did before because of the new things that we have access to? So that's kind of the question we've been asking back here behind the scenes.
I'd like to ask Dr. Jacques something because it's always a debate. I've heard both sides of this utilizing Supercell. I take it before I go to the gym and work out. Yep. And I typically take it and I wait about 45 minutes and I go to the gym and I work out. And I notice when I don't do that, but is it appropriate, because it is such a high antioxidant deal, is it appropriate to do it after you've created all those free radicals and inflammation and cortisol, or is it smarter to take it before your workout?
So I always encourage people, there's no rule with this product. I always encourage people to try and see what works best for them. But to be honest, the best use of this product is consistent use, right? So a lot of the antioxidants and even a lot of the nutrients that support cellular energy work best, not so much with timing, but they work better with consistency, meaning if you're taking them every day over a period of time. That's where you're going to start to really see the best results from them. I do think there's going to be some people, especially if they're really tuned into it, that might say, oh, I definitely noticed that I get a little better recovery if I take this, a couple hours after exercise. Or, some people who may notice, as you're saying, the opposite. Like I notice I do get that little extra burst of energy if I take this before my workout. But I think overall, I would just say consistency is the number one.
And also, before I turn it over to John Paul, I want to thank you for saying something that you can't say too many times as far as I'm concerned, which is our focus of BodyWise is not to be stagnant, not to stay the same, status quo. It's always to improve and go forward and make things better, not just equal. And I think that's been the gold standard of this company since 1989, and it's never changed. And I appreciate you bringing that to the forefront and mentioning that, because it's always been a reason we attract the people we do, frankly.
I was just wondering about maybe if there's a synergy between the Supercell and AIE10.
The word synergy to me probably might mean something different than other people. It usually means that things are sort of, working sort of dependently on each other, like sort of the way that we see like vitamin E and vitamin C, for example. But I think that what you could say is there are a great deal of nutrients in Supercell that are important to the immune system, and that are, part of how our cellular defense systems work. I mean, so especially a lot of those antioxidants are really critical to immune function and immune health. So from that standpoint, I think having a product that's very nutritionally rich in particularly a lot of those plant-based and nutritional antioxidants, it's certainly immune supportive in a very different way from the way AIE10 is, right? So I think you could see that as a kind of synergy, is you have one product that's kind of working with and interacting in the immune system one way, and then you have a group of nutritional and plant-based nutrients that are supporting the immune system in another way.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, it's Adrienne. I just had a question for Dr. Jacques. When I take Supercell, it gives me a lot more energy than when I took Oxygen, but my husband has COPD and he got a lot more, his breathing improved a lot more with Oxygen than Supercell. So my question is just, what is it in Supercell that would increase your oxygenation, or does it do that?
Yeah, again, it's a mix of things in Supercell. You have the chlorophyllin, for example, and I know people sometimes look at that and we don't have very much in there, but it doesn't take a lot of chlorophyll to carry oxygen into your cells. It's really a sort of a super molecule in that way. And then you have, I think for me, the next ones I really look at are the green plant concentrates, which again, sources of chlorophyll, like natural nutritional sources of trace minerals that are all oxygen carrying. For people who have issues around respiratory health, Adrienne, their issues around oxygenation are quite different for people than from people who don't. I'm a person with asthma, so I'm familiar with which asthma is also a form of a chronic respiratory disease, a chronic obstructive respiratory disease. And so for those of us who, it's a different issue, right? So we have more of a challenge literally physically getting that oxygen in, like, to our lungs versus getting it into our cells, right? Once it gets in your lungs, it can get into your cells. So we have kind of a separate problem. And I think, as I said, as we're looking at how we're coming out with whatever is going to be the next generation beyond Oxygen, that's a question that we've been talking about a lot, is what's going to kind of maybe better play that role.
Okay.
But chlorophyll is a super one for people with respiratory disease. It's a really great molecule, and you can actually even just, like, liquid chlorophyll's out there too. Like, you can actually go out and just find straight up liquid chlorophyll and put it in your water. It's just, good old straight up, it's basically plant blood. I mean, that sounds really gross when you say it, but technically that is literally what chlorophyll is. It's plant blood. And it's powerful stuff, honestly. So
would that help with energy or breathing?
It's an oxygenator, because
oxygenator.
That's how plants do their oxygenation, right? So it's just kind of it's the way that plants can share that with us.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. This is Linda. Dad's 94, and they said he actually is going through some challenges. They said his oxygen is like 98% when they test it, but his hemoglobin is really low. So I'm thinking that the Supercell would support the hemoglobin, if I understand.
Without us being able to answer like a super medical question based on somebody's labs, hemoglobin levels are really generated in the body, very specifically, usually from iron. So if he hasn't, I would hope he's maybe seeing someone who's kind of evaluating that more carefully. We do not have in this product line, one of the things we don't have is like a basic like iron product. That's not something that BodyWise has ever done. And I certainly wouldn't recommend one for Ken or for anyone else without, them seeing a doctor. I think that's something we usually don't recommend that people take iron supplementation unless they've kind of discussed it with their doctor. But for hemoglobin in particular, that's the more common recommendation is usually iron supplementation because people are low in iron for some reason if they're low in hemoglobin. Yeah, so you guys, between you and Adrienne, now we've covered some of the other things that are out there around cellular oxygenation that are there are other issues that can cause changes in oxygenation that are not so much what were the driving force behind some of these formulas, but they're very good questions. I mean, you're right that those things are all sort of tied in and tied together. You know, when you look at all the mechanisms that sort of drive these things within our body, depending on where in the process you kind of start looking, you can go back to another point. So making hemoglobin is a whole separate process in the body. And if people aren't making enough hemoglobin, then we have to ask the question of what makes hemoglobin, which is not so much what these formulas talk about. So,
is there a maximum amount you can take in one day of Supercell?
Well, so we always try to be pretty smart of basing our actual product recommendations on the amounts of nutrients that we think people should take. I know it's very American of us, all of us, to think that more is better. This is very American thinking. We always think more is better, supersize us, right? But you know, honestly, that 2 capsule a day recommendation is fairly thoughtful. From those of us who are nutritional scientists, we've tried to think that through. We've also tried to think, because we know that a lot of you who are product users are not just using Supercell, you're using Right Choice, and you're using Beta C, and you're using, you know, a whole host of other things. And so we try to look and think, okay, what would be, for example, the maximum amount of vitamin A we would want you to get if you were taking like our, you know, top selling products together, which I think a lot of people are. So, you know, while there are reasons that people could take more, we've been pretty thoughtful with the label recommendation.
So it's more important to be consistent, take it every day than to up your dose.
Yeah, consistency is usually much more important for people than, you know, than higher amounts for most things nutritional, honestly. And that's, you know, it's kind of what's cool about reorder programs, right? They sort of keep you honest about your consistency, right? And you're on a good reorder program, and you know, if you get to the end of the month and you've got like half the pills left in your bottle, you're like, I may not have been super consistent this past month. It doesn't mean you should catch up by taking the whole handful of pills at the bottom of the bottle, but it usually means that you should find a way to be more consistent. Yeah.
Okay, well, one other thing is, does Supercell do anything to reduce lactic acid when you're working out if you take it, say, an hour before a workout, or does it have any correlation? Because I find when I go to a swim practice, I can actually feel it kicking in halfway through, and if I don't take it, I feel like I'm producing more lactic acid. So I don't know if that's just in my head or not.
No, so I mean, so part of that sort of cellular cleanup process, right, especially with many of the antioxidants, is kind of helping with your cellular metabolism from the elimination standpoint of metabolic waste, right? And so some of those are antioxidants, some of them are acids that we, you know, collect and things like that. And so I do think that that's a real experience. That kind of relates back to the question that Steve was asking is, you know, before exercise, after exercise, and my general answer to that is I think consistency is more important, but I think, like Steve said, he has a real experience of noticing that he benefits more from this formula if he takes it before exercise.
During my workout, if I didn't take it, within a half an hour to an hour, I'd start shutting down due to lactic acid. And if I take it an hour before, I don't find that happens.
I think that's a real experience. I really do. And I think it's just, I think we're going to have some range of how people experience that, because we have a lot of, you know, genetic variability between humans, and there's a lot of just differences between us in the way that we do energy processing. But no, I think that is a real function of some of the nutrients in here, especially the ones that are working on that sort of back end of the energy cycle, where you've got some of that cellular waste being produced. And, you know, that's part of what antioxidants and some of these other nutrients do is you know, help you manage that.